Hello everyone, welcome to today's Opsview webinar for tips and tricks and how to upgrade. I'm Helen Carroll, VP of Marketing. Joining me today is Neill Collie, one of our senior Opsview consultants. The session is going to take about 30 minutes and then we'll have a nice long 10-15 minute session for Q&A. Any of the screenshots that you see today from Neill, if they're not familiar, that's because Neill is running the latest version of Opsview. Just to note, we are recording today's session, so we will share that with you afterwards. If I can ask everyone to stay on mute and submit any questions you have through the chat facility, that would be great. Neill, over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Helen. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today's session. Like Helen says, we're going to do around half an hour of tips and tricks, and then I will delve into a little bit of the process for upgrading. So upgrading from an older version, say Opsview 5.4, to the latest version, as well as upgrading from a slightly more recent version, Opsview 6X to Opsview 6.3. So by the time we get to the end, we should have 10-15 minutes or so for questions. So if you are thinking of upgrading but haven't taken the plunge for whatever reason and have upgrade questions, that would be a great time to ask them. But I'll get started and dive right in. I usually start with a very brief recap of some of the Opsview terminology. So when I talk about a host, what I'm really talking about is a container for our services. So a service is something that we're interested in. So CPU usage, disk space, EC2 credits, whether or not a particular service is up and running, response time from a web page, that kind of thing. And our plugins are the scripts or programs or EXEs that do all the actual monitoring work. And really a service check just tells Opsview when to run the plugin, and a host is where we point those service checks. We can organize all of that logically into groups, so host groups and service groups. And both types of checks use plugins, but service checks allow us a lot more flexibility than standard host checks. We can go into detail with all these checks. We can grab all that detail using dashboards, and as I'll show you slightly later today, we can export that information in a few ways. But we can generate dashboards and graphs to share and view the information gathered by Opsview. Some of the tips and tricks I want to delve into, let's go back to our agenda here. I want to look at some performance tuning, some security options, some UI options that maybe we've not seen before, so making bulk changes and modifying variables. The option to create what we call like an escalation level in notifications, so you can configure your notifications to alert from a particular level. So create an escalation type notification event. We can go and configure our ODW, which is our long-term data warehouse, our long-term storage. And then I'm going to dig into troubleshooting and, like I said, the results exporter, how you might get results from Opsview into something like Splunk or something like that. And then we'll dig into upgrades. So performance. So this little section is aimed at those of you who have quite a busy Opsview installation, quite a well-used Opsview server, and you find that your web UI is not quite as performant as you'd like, so it doesn't respond particularly quickly, or sometimes you see the occasional 503 where it can't service a request. And that's because we use a web front end called Starman that talks to Catalyst and serves the dynamic pages that you see in your Opsview installation. This is the same for Opsview 5 and 6, so this will apply to both versions. And if you've got a powerful server and you've got a busy system, it's possible to increase the number of these Starman processes to improve the web response. So this will cost you memory, but you'll reap the benefits in response time and page loading times, that kind of thing. A very rough calculation can be the max number of servers times 280 megs. So if you increase that to 10, that will cost you just over a gig of RAM. And that value lives in our Opsview Web .local file on our master server. So on Opsview 6, if I open up my terminal here, hopefully everyone can see that nice and clear. So this is a terminal to a live Opsview 6 training system that we run, and this web.local file contains a few useful directives. The main one I'm going to point out now is this particular set of directives. So inside production engine, we've got max and min servers and max and min spare servers. The default is 3, so that will just cost you 500 megs of RAM and will allow you to service three processes to service requests coming in. If we increase that to say 10 or 12 or however much we need, we can get a much more responsive web app. But like I say, it'll cost you RAM, and all you've got to do is change this file. And on my training system, I've got this set at 10. The file, just to reiterate, lives at Opsview web app Opsview_web_local.yaml. It's just a YML file that includes a few other directives. So I've got an Opsview base prefix if I want to rehome Opsview. So my training environment, the Opsview installation, actually lives at /Opsview, not at the root directory. So not at this level here. So it just lives in Opsview. So you can change that very easily just by adding this directive, and I can change some sessions and some other defaults that I'll get into in a moment. One of which is the account lockout. So we've got some newly introduced security mechanisms in Opsview 6, and one of those is configuring throttling parameters for login attempts. So if a user tries 10 times and fails to log in, they'll be locked out for an hour. If a request from the API tries 50 times with 50 different users, then from the same IP address, then they would be locked out for an hour. And you can change all of these thresholds, all of these limits, again in that Opsview web file, or we can add it to user vars, which is another config file we can modify. But we can add these overrides to that file and modify these settings. So if I want to allow users only 5 login attempts before I lock them out for an hour, then I can do that there. I can allow IP addresses only 25 attempts, and then I lock them out for an hour. Quite configurable, quite powerful, and a lot of value there to lock down your Opsview installation to prevent those brute force login attempts that the bots love to attempt these days. This comes enabled by default on Opsview 6.3.5 and above. So something new to look out for when you do upgrade. And sticking with the performance theme, if you've got service checks that take a long time to run, there are a few other changes we can make. And these will help you, this will save you a lot of time. You won't have to manually modify every single service check. You can just increase the timeouts and various execution thresholds for service checks en masse. So I can allow service checks 2 minutes to run, same for host checks. If I've got event handlers or notifications that can sometimes take a while to run, I can give them specific timeouts, and they just live in executed.yaml. So I'll show you guys very quickly where they live. So we've got this executed.yaml file, and I could just add these directives to this file. I think the pasting is going to go a bit strange there, but I would add these directives to this file, and that would automatically apply these settings to all of my service checks and my host checks. I can also do the same for SNMP host interfaces, and we saw that in this file. I've got my host interfaces here, and we can set that globally by adding these thresholds to this file here. If you've got a lot of SNMP devices and a lot of SNMP interfaces, you know how many you know how many settings you'd have to manually change if you had to do them every single time. So this can save you a lot of time too, just by setting that default critical and warning level on your host interfaces. And these ones live in user vars, which is something new to Opsview 6, where you can set these limits and set these thresholds, and then they get assigned and they get applied for you. This isn't something that's available in Opsview 5. So if you're looking for these options, you won't find them in Opsview 5. You will find them in Opsview 6. But that does save you a lot of manual clicking. Otherwise, you'd have to go to say networking, find your device, find your interfaces, and then manually modify every single one of these thresholds. Just so I would have to do this every time. So those settings can save you a huge amount of time. Okay, so there's some performance tuning. We can also tune our. Before I move too much further on, we can also tune our database. And one of my favorite tips I like to do when I'm delivering training is to perhaps for those of us who aren't database admins by trade and who just are tasked with keeping our Opsview system up and running, you can get a base level of MySQL tuning put in place by using a very handy little utility called MySQL Tuner. We can grab that from mysqltuner.pl. And it's just a Perl script. So you can view it if you are interested to see its contents. It's just a Perl script maintained by a community, and it analyzes your current MySQL installation and then spits out some suggestions for you. So these are the things that I might want to modify on my current Opsview system if I want to get better performance. So maybe I want to increase my InnoDB buffer pool size. Maybe I want to increase these log files. I want to increase the query cache size and type, and I want to add some sane privilege restrictions there. I really like this tool just to get a base level of MySQL configuration in place, and you can run it regularly just to make sure that the recommendations make sense, and then tweak the settings afterwards. But just to apply that base level of config, this is a really useful little tool. It's fully open source. It's maintained and updated quite regularly, and just well worth using if you are not a MySQL admin. Another tip, I don't know if we'd really call it a tip, but another tip can be if you find that your MySQL database performance is slow, you can distribute your databases. So you can move them off to dedicated hardware and modify the Opsview configuration to point to an external database. So you can use dedicated database hardware, faster disks, more RAM, that kind of thing, and have your database on a separate system. And that too can vastly increase the speed and response of your Opsview UI, because everything you see in this user interface, every service check that's running, every host and every service check that you edit or modify or view, all of that is stored in a MySQL database. So the faster your database, the faster things like this are populated, and the faster things like this return. So these queries and that little refresh or loading screen are reduced significantly. Okay. One thing upgrading to Opsview 6 will get you, that doesn't exist in 5, is a new component called the results exporter. And like it says there, this allows us to export messages to external services. It reads and filters those messages and allows us to send them to quite a few different locations. So I can send them to a log file, I can send them to HTTPS endpoint and things like Splunk. So I can send them to either a file, a syslog server, and I can filter on all of this. So rather than me manually configuring one of these, which would take a long time, I can give you some indication of all the options you have and encourage you to go and visit this exporting results option here. We can send these results, like I say, to log files, to syslog servers, and to HTTPS endpoints like Splunk, like Moogsoft. And this can save us, one, licensing costs, because we can filter out the data that we actually send. And then we can analyze everything that Opsview is, any result, every service check, everything that Opsview is querying, we can then analyze in a tool such as Moogsoft or Splunk. It's really handy, really powerful module, definitely worth investigating, especially if you use something like Splunk or Moog in your environments. Opsview can kind of sit at the center of things and just send that result, send that useful info to these tools, which they can ingest, and then you can analyze and watch for trends and predict when capacity is going to run out and decide when you need to add new hardware. Which is also where our Ansible module would come in if you're adding new hardware or deploying new infrastructure. One of the most improved pieces of pieces that come with the new Opsview 6 is our Ansible module. So our Ansible integration allows you to include in an Ansible playbook settings to automatically add new infrastructure to Opsview, to apply a host template, to apply service checks, to add variables, and to kick off an Opsview reload, so to apply those changes automatically. So that as soon as the deploy process with an Ansible kicks off, you know that that same system is then added straight into Opsview and that everything's monitored comprehensively. Everything's monitored without you having to worry about maybe missing a server or missing a service check. You know that it's all taken care of, it's all automated. And it does that using our REST API. And our REST API is very, very comprehensive. Everything that you see in the Opsview web interface, you can do with the API. To demonstrate that, I will go to the REST API docs, go to the most recent version, so 6.3. And our REST API docs cover in great detail everything that you can do in query and automate with our API. And like I say, almost anything that you can see in the web interface, so in our normal Opsview usage, anything I can see and do within the user interface here, with the exception of one or two dashboard elements, I can do with the API. So if I want to add a host or modify a host config or apply changes or view system settings or whatever I want to do, I can do that with the API. So if you're looking to automate stuff, I really would strongly suggest we take a look at the API, because there's a lot in there. And I could really do a whole training course on the API. But I've just covered it in a couple of minutes. Just if you are interested, go take a look. I've included this as a tip, variables, because when I'm delivering training normally and when I talk to customers who've known and used Opsview for a long time, sometimes they're not too sure about variables and how variables work and where they sit within Opsview. So I'll just spend a minute or two going through variables. So out of the box, Opsview bundles variables that various service checks use. And for those familiar with the concept of a variable, within a scripting language or a programming language, it's exactly what you think it is. Just a setting or a device that allows us to use host-specific information within service checks. So I can set, for example, a disk partition, a disk mount point here as a disk variable, and then the service check uses that variable so it knows what to check. And the best way to demonstrate that is perhaps to show you. So I've got this disk variable, and it's checking this location here. So it's just the value is a /, which means it's just going to check the root partition. And if I go and take a look at this system within Opsview, so that was collector 1. What you'll see is that this disk check is running using that specific variable. So if I go and investigate and troubleshoot that check, I can see that it's using these arguments, disk number 1, and that's how the variable is referenced. It's referenced using these variable names encapsulated by the percentage symbol either side, and then it reads any disk variable assigned to this host. And in my case, it's just this root symbol here. If I was to add another one, in many cases, if it's configured to do so, a service check will read every single variable and duplicate and create as many service checks as it needs. So if I add a second disk variable, so the exact same name, but I also want to check something at etc or USR. I want to see how much space is on this partition here at USR local. I've added a second disk variable, and as soon as I've applied changes, so as soon as that's been committed to Opsview, when I look at collector 1, I'll see that without me having added a second check or without me having modified anything else, in a minute or two, I'll have another check will appear here. So if we want to use those variables in our own system or on our own service checks, we go to configuration and then variables and just click add new. So this loads a new window, and I can give mine a name. And then, so this can be argument 1, arg2, etc. If I want to encrypt any of these and store them encrypted, so if this was a password, for example, I would store that encrypted. So now I've got a new variable that service checks can reference within Opsview. So these can be really, really hugely useful, not just for login details, but for parameters and arguments and a few other things. You can use these variables to customize your service checks per host. And if you're worried about security, like I say here, you can encrypt them, and then users can't read them, even if they have direct database access. They're stored encrypted, so you can't, of course, go and read them. And then just to circle back on here, we can see that I'm now using my USR local disk variable as well as my existing one. This one's quite new, and it's checking the space on that drive. Okay, troubleshooting. So again, this is aimed at those of us who maybe maintain our Opsview system or are Opsview admins and occasionally do a little bit of troubleshooting. In Opsview 6, what we have done is change the way that that Opsview logs. So we centrally log everything using syslog. If you want to, you can use syslog-ng, but by default we'll use our syslog, and that means that we can very simply configure per component logging. So if I want to see more detail for a specific Opsview service, so the executor or the scheduler or my overall orchestrator or something specific within Opsview, say SNMP traps, I want to see more logging to work out why a service check isn't working or if I've got a specific issue, I can do that. We can send logs to central logging servers as well, of course. But it means that we can have a lot more control over logging than we perhaps used to in Opsview 5. And that's all controlled using this file. So this is all controlled using the 99-opsview.conf file in our syslogd. I've got just the defaults here, but we can very quickly add extra directives to this file. So we can have per component logging, we can have per component logging details, or I can modify logging again if I go to Opsview and then the component name. So maybe I want to take a look at some extra information about service checks that are running, and I know that the executor runs those service checks. I can increase this just for the executor, so just for the thing that runs my service checks, and then I can restart my Opsview executor and just view this debug info, but only for my Opsview executor. So that gives me a lot more information on the service check being run, huge amounts more information. So even the ones that are running okay, not just the errors. So I can compare and view and contrast what's going on. It really does help you debug. Also, of course, it generates a little bit more noise. So you don't necessarily want to leave that on all the time. But if you are troubleshooting something, per component based debug logging is very, very useful. Okay, this one is actually quite useful as well. So if you go ahead and forget your admin password, you can reset it to the phrase initial. So you can reset it so that you can log in with the username admin and the password initial. If you've still got MySQL access to your database, you can go and set that. You can run this exact command, and that's actually up and documented on our knowledge base. You can run this exact command, and this string is the encrypted string for the phrase initial, and that will reset your Opsview password if you ever forget it. This can be quite useful, especially post upgrade. And sometimes, this is my final thing on troubleshooting. Sometimes it's very useful to be able to take a look at the Opsview message queues. So Opsview 6 now runs on message queues. Instead of moving around NDO objects, which you may know and love from Opsview 5, we use message queues to send and receive all of our results and some config information. And that's because RabbitMQ has built-in resiliency and the native ability for HA and queue sharing. It's perfectly designed for a monitoring system. A normal usage, what you'll see is that each collector gets a queue. We get queues for results, queues for service checks waiting to be run, queues for performance data, and queues for extra services such as my results exporter. And we see straight away that something's definitely not quite right with this particular queue because it's got 700,000 entries. And this is a really useful troubleshooting tool. If one of your services are not working, you can run this command with the Opsview password here. You can run that command and get a list of your queues. And so immediately I know that my results exporter queue is perhaps not working. And I can see that that's because my results exporter is not running. So I would go and maybe restart that service or look at the log file and try and find out why perhaps it hasn't started. So looking at this overall queue list is an excellent way of getting an idea of what's going on your Opsview system. You'll probably see that within Opsview, we also monitor all of those queues. So by default, out of the box for self-health, we monitor all of those queues. And another queue that's not quite right is my flow collector. And again, we've probably seen here that my flow collector isn't running. And Opsview keeps an eye on that. So another tip and trick is to keep an eye on your Opsview criticals, because that will inform you as to the health, the overall health of your Opsview system. Which brings us now on to upgrades. Some of us may still be on older versions of Opsview, so on 5.4 or 4.6, or hopefully not too much older. But depending on the size and the complexity of Opsview, so with how many slaves you've got, distributed DBs, age of the operating system, that kind of thing, this process can take a few hours to a day. It can take a little while to upgrade. To do an in-place upgrade, so to do an upgrade without migrating off of your current hardware onto new hardware, you must already be running Opsview 5.4.2. Otherwise, you can't go from 5.4.2 to 6.3 or 6.4. If you have Opsview on a virtual environment, then you can snapshot these before the upgrade is started, and then we've got the option to back out. If not, you may well wish to perform a migration, but we've also got documentation on how you maybe want to back up your Opsview databases and your Opsview files before an in-place upgrade if you're not on a virtual environment. So if you want to upgrade in place but are on non-virtualized hardware, you do have options to take backups. The in-place process is basically a case of currently gathering the current information about Opsview 5.4, so how many slaves, location of the database, number of service checks, types of service checks, that kind of thing. And then we'll use our Ansible-based upgrader tool to upgrade everything. And this will include updates to your OS. So anything that would be updated using, say, Yum update or apps upgrade will also get updated as well. So that's something to bear in mind. It will also go ahead and register and configure Opsview collectors. So what we used to call Opsview slaves are now Opsview collectors. So part of the upgrade will do that for us. There are quite a few prerequisites here. So we want to make sure that we have a supported OS. And by supported OS, we now mean Ubuntu 16, Ubuntu 18, Red Hat 7, and CentOS 7, and then Debian 8 as well. So anything older than that will require an OS upgrade. We do have Red Hat 8, CentOS 8 support coming in the near future, so within a few months. So by the latest, the middle of next year. We also need root shell access to the Opsview master servers. We also need SSH access to all of the slaves as the root user or as a user that can sudo to root, has the ability to elevate to the root user without passwords, because that's part of the installation process. Like it says here, the target user on the slaves must also either have passwordless sudo access or be the root user itself. And then if the database is a separate database server, you also want root access to that MySQL server as well. And the MySQL username should be root to make the upgrade as smooth as possible. Using the auth socket plugin to access the DB doesn't currently work. That's something we'll add soon, but right now it must have access using the MySQL native password. So you just do something like It's in here somewhere. Okay. So you'd have to do something like that to log in. And you can see all the DBs that we need to modify. So right now we can't use that the auth socket plugin that newer versions of MySQL ship with. So once we have those prereqs in place, then an in-place upgrade is an in-place upgrade from 5.4 can take a while. It's a lot simpler from 6.1, 6.2 to 6.3. The process would simply be take a backup of your data just to be sure, and then we run the deployment process, which will connect to our repo, which will download the newer packages, take any variables we've got in Opsview deploy already, verify that everything's upgraded and started as we expect, grab new versions of our newest ops packs. So that's how we get new service checks and new host templates into Opsview that we release. So we recently released Cisco monitoring ops packs, Exchange, Azure. All of that comes as part of an upgrade. And then it'll also automatically apply those changes and make sure that Opsview is all up to date. If we want more detail on any of this is all comprehensively documented up on knowledge.opsview.com. There's a lot here, so I've tried to distill it down. But now is a great time for any questions. So questions for those of us looking to upgrade from Opsview 5 or Opsview 6.
Hey, Neil, thank you for that. Fantastic tips and tricks. I liked all of those. I've got one question, and there's a few more just coming through. So the first question is, the customer says, we're too busy working on other projects at the moment. Is it possible to have Opsview help upgrade?
Oh, yes. So if you would like Opsview upgraded, but don't have the time, or maybe don't have the Linux knowledge to do it yourselves, then yeah, our professional services team have been doing these upgrades on our larger environments for a while now, for a good year. Yeah, we do custom upgrades for customers, and we've got the process down to a fine art now. So yeah, we can take care of that for you.
Great, thank you, Neil. Next question. We have an old Opsview 5.1 system. What's the recommended path to migrate to 6.4?
So that would depend. What I would suggest is, in that case, a migration to new hardware, because a system like that is relatively old, and a new version and jumping a few version numbers gives you the opportunity to refresh your hardware, to get onto a new supported operating system, and to maybe re-architect Opsview a little bit if you need to. So I would suggest a full migration there. So that is a fresh operating install, a new installation of Opsview, and then a migration of all of your data. So all your service checks, all your hosts, and all your users, we could automatically export and import into that new Opsview system. I wouldn't suggest going to 5.4 in that case, and then going to 6.3, because I suspect it would be a legacy system with a lot of older remnants lying around that we no longer really need.
Hey, thank you, Neil. Next question is a tip or trick, actually. Any tricks to modify a report?
Oh yeah, so I could actually do a whole 3-hour course on that as well. So reports can be modified. So well, it's been my hour. So you may have noticed here we've got Jasper Server. So our reports are a MySQL database that we can modify ourselves. The actual reports themselves are simply XML files that live in here. They live in Jasper. And they're just XML files, so you can modify all those XML files if you've got access to that data. So you can do it, and if you know SQL and you know a little bit about modifying XML files, it's relatively straightforward. So what I would suggest is take a report that's similar to what you already want to run a report on. So maybe an availability report if you're interested in daily events, and you maybe wanted to turn that to daily events for a specific host group. You would find the daily events report XML file, modify that slightly, or find a query that it used to modify that slightly, and then save that new report, but just having slightly modified your existing one. You can create them from scratch, but until you've tried it a few different times, modify an existing one.
Hey Neil, there's a follow-on question from that. I was looking to get an Opsview agent version. Now is being set up as hashtags.
So you're looking to get a list of Opsview agents via, or a list of all the different Opsview agents you've got in your environment using a hashtag, or you wanted to see all of the statuses of Opsview agents using a hashtag? Is there any clarification on that question?
No, not yet.
Okay, maybe something to follow up with after this. I suspect you could probably get to the latter with a hashtag. You can get the status of all your agents using a hashtag really easily.
They have different installations, if that helps.
Yeah, I think that does help. So if you're looking for the installations of all your agents, you just create a new one, and then for a service check, you'll have in here you'll have agent. So you can simply just use one of these agent checks. So one of these Opsview agent checks on all of your, and then select every single host in your environment, and then that would work quite nicely. I think that would show you the status of all of your agents. So if I did that, this hashtag would just show me the agents and their status on all my systems, wherever I could find them. Oh, I see. Gabriel has so he's trying to upgrade them. No, you won't be able to do that doing it automatically, but you could get a list of ones that would need upgrading, certainly. I would suggest, ping me your support after this, and maybe we can work through some kind of solution to that.
Okay, Neil, I think we are out of time, unfortunately, for any more questions.
Yeah, we're right up there to the 2:15 mark, aren't we? Nice.
We are. Thank you so much, Neil. Very insightful. We have recorded the session. We will be sending it through to you tomorrow as a follow-up. Thank you for joining, everyone, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.